Chapter 7. The author, being informed of a design to accuse him of high treason, makes his escape to Belfuscu. His reception there. Before I proceed to give an account of my leaving this kingdom, it may be proper to inform the reader of a private intrigue which had been for 2 months forming against me. I had been hitherto all my life a stranger to courts, for which I was unqualified by the meanness of my condition. I had indeed heard and read enough of the dispositions of great princes and ministers, but never expect to have found such terrible effects of them in so remote a country, governed, as I thought, by very different maxims from those of Europe. When I was just prepared to pay my attendance on the Emperor of Belfuscu, a considerable person at court, to whom I had been very serviceable, at a time when he lay under the highest displeasure of his Imperial Majesty, came to my house very privately at night in a closed chair, and, without sending his name, desired admittance. The chairmen were dismissed. I put the chair, with his lordship in it, into my coat pocket, and, giving orders to a trusty servant to say that I was indisposed and gone to sleep, I fastened the door of my house, placed the chair on the table according to my usual custom, and sat down by it. After the common salutations were over, observing his lordship's countenance full of concern, and inquiring into reason, he desired I would hear him with patience, in a matter that highly concerned my honor and my life. His speech was to the following effect. I took notes of it as soon as he left me. "You are to know," said he, "that several committees of council have been lately called, in the most private manner, on your account, and it is but 2 days since his Majesty came to a full resolution. You are very sensible that Skyresh Bologum, Gllvr, or High Admiral, has been your mortal enemy almost ever since your arrival. His original reasons I know not, but his hatred is increased since your great success against Belfuscu, by which his glorious admiral is much obscured. This lord, in conjunction with Filmnap, the High Treasurer, whose enmity against you is notorious on account of his Lady Limtock, the General, Lalcom, the Chamberlain, and Balmuff, the Grand Justiciary, have prepared articles of impeachment against you for treason and other capital crimes." This preface made me so impatient, being conscious of my own merits and innocence, that I was going to interrupt him, when he entreated me to be silent, and thus proceeded. "Out of gratitude for the favors you have done me, I procured information of the whole proceedings, and a copy of the articles wherein I venture my head for your service. Articles of impeachment against Quinbus Felstrom, the Man Mountain. Article 1. Whereas, by a statute made in the reign of His Imperial Majesty Calin Defar Plune, it is enacted that whoever shall make waters within the precincts of the royal palace shall be liable to the pains and penalty of high treason, notwithstanding the said Quinbus Felstrom, in open breach of said law, under colour of extinguishing the fire kindled in the apartment of His Majesty's most dear imperial consort, did maliciously, traitorously, and devilishly, by discharge of his urine, put out the said fire, kindling in the said apartment, kindled in the said apartment, lying and being within the precincts of the said royal palace, against the statute in that case provided, etc., against duty, etc. Article 2. That the said Quinbus Felstrin, having brought the imperial fleet of Belfuscu into the royal port, and being afterwards commanded by His Imperial Majesty to seize all the other ships of said empire of Belfuscu, and reduce that empire to a province to be governed by a viceroy from hence, and to destroy and put to death not only all the big Indian exiles, but likewise all the people of that empire who would not immediately forsake the big Indian heresy, he, the said Felstrin, like a false traitor against his most auspicious serene Imperial Majesty, did petition to be excused from said service upon pretence of unwillingness to force the consciences or destroy the liberties and lives of an innocent people. Article 3. That, whereas certain ambassadors arrived from the court of Belfuscu to sue for peace in His Majesty's court, he, the said Felstrin, did like a false traitor aid, abet, comfort, and divert the said ambassadors, although he knew them to be servants to a prince who he was lately an open enemy to his imperial majesty, and in open war against his said majesty. Article 4. That the said Quinbus Felstring, contrary to the duties of a faithful subject, is now preparing to make a voyage to the court and empire of Blefuscu, for which he has received only verbal license from his imperial majesty, and, under colour of said license, does falsely and traitorously intend to take the said voyage, and thereby to aid, comfort, and abet the emperor of Blefuscu, so lately an enemy, and in open war with his imperial majesty aforesaid. There are some other articles, but these are the most important, of which I have read you an abstract. In several debates upon this impeachment, it must be confessed that his majesty gave many marks of his great lenity, often urging that the services you had done him, and the endeavouring to extenuate your crimes. The treasurer and admiral insisted that you should be put to the most painful and ignominious death by setting fire to your house at night, and the general was to attend with 20,000 men armed with poisoned arrows to shoot you on the hands and face. Some of your servants were to have private orders to strew a poisonous juice on your shirts and sheets, which would soon make you tear your own flesh and die in the utmost torture. The general came into the same opinion, so that for a long time there was a majority against you, but his majesty, resolving, if possible, to spare your life, at last brought off the chamberlain. Upon this incident, Reldresal, principal secretary for private affairs, who always approved himself your true friend, was commanded by the emperor to deliver his opinion, which he accordingly did, and therein justified the good thoughts you have of him. He allowed your crimes to be great, but still there was room for mercy, the most commendable virtue in a prince, and for which his majesty was so justly celebrated. He said the friendship between you and him was so well known to the world that perhaps the most honourable board might think him partial. However, in obedience to the command he had received, he would freely offer his sentiments. That is, if his let me try this again. He said the friendship between you and him was so well known to the world that perhaps the most honourable board might think him partial. However, in obedience to the command he had received, he would freely offer his sentiments. That if his majesty, in consideration of your services, and pursuant to his own merciful disposition, would please to spare your life, and would only give orders to put out both your eyes, he humbly conceived that by this expedient justice might in some measure be satisfied, and all the world would applaud the lenity of the emperor, as well as the fair, generous proceedings of those who have the honour to be his counsellors. That the loss of your eyes would be no impediment to your bodily strength, by which you might still be useful to his majesty. That blindness is an addition to courage, by concealing dangers from us. That the fear you had for your eyes was the greatest difficulty in bringing over the enemy's fleet, and would be sufficient for you to see by the eyes of the ministers, since the greatest princes do no more. This proposal was received with the utmost disapprobation by the whole board. Bologum, the admiral, could not preserve his temper, but, rising up in fury, he wondered how the secretary durst presume to give his opinion for preserving the life of a traitor, and that the services you had performed were, by all true reason of state, the greatest aggravation of your crimes, that you, who were able to extinguish the fire by discharge of urine in your majesty's apartment, which he mentioned with horror, might at another time raise by inundation by the same means to drown the whole palace, and the same strength which enabled you to bring over the enemy's fleet might serve upon the first discontent to carry it back. That he had good reasons to think that you were a big endier in your heart, and, as treason begins in the heart, it appears in overt acts, so he accused you as a traitor on that account, and therefore insisted you be put to death. The treasurer was of the same opinion. He showed to what straits his majesty's revenue was reduced by the charge of maintaining you, which would soon grow insupportable. that the secretary's expedient of putting out your eyes was so far from being a remedy against this evil, that it would probably increase it, as is manifest from the common practice of blinding some kinds of fowls, after which they are fed faster and grew soon fatter, that his sacred majesty and the council, who are your judges, were, in their own consciences, fully convinced of your guilt, which was a sufficient argument to condemn you to death, without the formal proofs required by the strict letter of the law. But his imperial majesty, fully determined against capital punishment, was graciously pleased to say that since the council thought the loss of your eyes too easy a censure, some other way may be inflicted hereafter. Your friend the secretary humbly desired to be heard again, in answer to what the treasurer had objected, concerning the great charge his majesty was at in maintaining you, said that his excellency, who had the sole disposal of the emperor's revenue, might easily provide against that evil by gradually lessening your establishment, by which, for want of sufficient food, you would grow weak and faint, and lose your appetite, and consequently decay and consume in a few months. Neither would the stench of your carcass be then so dangerous when it should become more than half diminished, and immediately upon your death 5,000 or 6,000 of his majesty's subjects might, in 2 or 3 days, cut your flesh from your bones, take it away by the cartloads, and bury it in distant parts, to prevent infection, leaving the skeleton as a monument of admiration to posterity. Thus, by the great friendship of the secretary, the whole affair was compromised. It was strictly enjoined that the project of starving you by degrees should be kept a secret, but the sentence of putting out your eyes was entered on the books, none dissenting, except Bologum, the admiral, who, being a creature of the empress, was perpetually instigated by her majesty to insist upon your death, she having borne perpetual malice against you on account of that infamous and illegal method you took to extinguish the fire in her apartment. In 3 days your friend the secretary will be directed to come to your house and read before you the articles of impeachment, and then to signify the great leniency and favour of his majesty in council, whereby you are only condemned to the loss of your eyes, which his majesty does not question you will gratefully and humbly submit to, and 20 of his majesty's surgeons will attend, in order to see the operation well performed by discharging very sharp-pointed arrows into the balls of your eyes as you lie on the ground. I leave you to your prudence as what measures you will take, and to avoid suspicion, I must immediately return in as a private manner as I came. His lordship did so, and I remained alone under many doubts and perplexities of mind. It was a custom introduced by this prince and his ministry, very different, as I have been assured, from the practices of former times, that after the court has decreed any cruel execution, either to gratify the monarch's resentment or the malice of a favourite, the emperor will always make a speech to his whole council, expressing his great leniency and tenderness, as qualities known and confessed by all the world. This speech was immediately published throughout the kingdom, nor did anything terrify the people so much as those encomiums on his majesty's mercy, because it was observed that the more these praises were enlarged and insisted on, the more inhuman was the punishment, and the sufferer more innocent. Yet, as to myself, I must confess, having never been designed for a courtier, either by my birth or education, I was so ill a judge of things that I could not discover the leniency and favour of this sentence, but conceived it, perhaps erroneously, rather to be rigorous than gentle. I sometimes thought of standing my trial, for though I could not deny the facts alleged in several articles, yet I hoped they would admit of some extenuations. But having in my life perused many state trials, which I ever observed to terminate as the judges thought fit to direct, I durst not rely on so dangerous a decision. And in so critical a juncture, and against such powerful enemies, once I was strongly bent upon resistance, for, while I had liberty, the whole strength of that empire could hardly subdue me, and I might easily with stones pelt the metropolis to pieces, but I soon rejected that project with horror, by remembering the oath that I had made to the emperor, the favours I had received from him, and the high title of Nardak he conferred upon me. Neither had I so soon learned the gratitude of courtiers to persuade myself that his majesty's present severities acquitted me of all past obligations. At last I fixed upon a resolution for which it is probable I may incur some censure, and not unjustly, for I confess I owe the preserving of my eyes and consequently my liberty to my own great rashness and want of experience, because if I had then known the nature of princes and ministers, which I have since observed in many other courts, and their methods of treating criminals less obnoxious than myself, I should, with great clarity and readiness, have submitted to so easy a punishment, but hurried on by precipitancy of youth, and having his Imperial Majesty's license to pay my attendance upon the Emperor of Belfuscu, I took this opportunity, before the 3 days were elapsed, to send my letter to my friend the Secretary, signifying my resolution of setting out that morning for Belfuscu, pursuant to the leave I had got, and, without waiting for an answer, I went to that side of the island where our fleet lay. I seized a large man of war, tied a cable to the prow, and lifting up the anchors, I stripped myself, putting my clothes together with my coverlet, and carried under my arm, into the vessel, and drawing it after me, between wading and swimming, arrived at the royal port of Belfuscu, where many people had long expected me. They lent me 2 guides to direct me to the capital city, which is of the same name. I held them in my hands till I came within 200 yards of the gate, and desired them to signify my arrival to one of the secretaries, and let him know I there waited his Majesty's command. I had an answer in about an hour, that his Majesty, attended by the royal family, and with great officers of the court, was coming out to receive me. I advanced 100 yards. The Emperor and his train alighted from their horses, the Empress and ladies from their coaches, and I did not perceive that they were in any fright or concern. I lay on the ground to kiss his Majesty's and the Empress's hands. I told his Majesty that I was coming according to my promise, and with the license of the Emperor my master, to have the honor of seeing so mighty a monarch, and offer him any service in my power consistent with my duty to my own prince, not mentioning a word of my disgrace, because I had hitherto no regular information of it, and might suppose myself wholly ignorant of any such design, neither could I reasonably conceive that the Emperor would discover the secret, while I was out of his power, wherein, however, it soon appeared I was deceived. I shall not trouble the reader with a particular account of my reception at this court, which was suitable to the generosity of so great a prince, nor of the difficulties I was in for want of a house and bed, being forced to lie on the ground, wrapped in my coverlet.